I've noticed recently that many folks in the health space have been celebrating and championing Gen Z for their decrease in alcohol consumption. For those who aren't aware, Gen Z is significantly down in their amounts of drinking compared to the previous three generations of millennials, Gen X, their parents, and then the boomers. That Gen Z is, on the whole, drinking way less than the previous generations. Many in the health space have been championing this as Gen Z is starting to finally see, and they're the first generation to recognize the negative health aspects around alcohol, that they're taking initiative, that they're taking control of their health and decreasing their alcohol intake to prioritize their own well-being. But I think I want to call bull on this. No one seems to be asking the question of what is Gen Z doing instead of drinking. And it turns out that the average Gen Z individual spends most of their time inside, sitting on a couch or on a screen. That on average, Gen Z is not sleeping very well, they're increasingly obese, and generally more unhealthy than people have been at this time in their lives in the past. So I don't think you can attribute the decrease in alcohol consumption amongst Gen Z solely to health awareness. My hunch that it isn't a health issue for most is because it wasn't necessarily for me. My own story in relationship with alcohol has led me to believe that Gen Z, rather than it being a win that Gen Z is drinking less, I think Gen Z, that young people need to drink more. My story with alcohol begins around the beginning of freshman year when I moved into a fraternity. I was a rather sheltered former homeschooler who had hardly seen a drop of alcohol poured in my life. And at the same time, I was generally a little bit uptight, a little bit socially anxious, scared about uncertain and new situations. I was kind of terrified of moving off to college. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't have control of my circumstances. I didn't know what life would be like on a day-to-day basis, who I was going to meet, how I was going to interact with people. And it was generally a pretty frightening thing. And so when I showed up at this fraternity, we had student orientation and everything, going to meetings and going to seminars and getting lectured to. There was fraternity rush most evenings, and this was coming out of COVID. So many of the seniors, juniors, and especially the sophomores, the rising sophomores, hadn't gotten to let loose much because the previous year was COVID lockdown. And while all that was going on, there was drinking and socializing and hanging out past the hours of 10, 11, midnight, and onwards. And me, as this timid, kind of scared, like 18-year-old kid at the time, I had no interest in taking a part of that. There was something risky and potentially dangerous, and then I'd have to go out and put myself in uncomfortable situations. I didn't know who I was going to meet. I didn't know who I'd have to talk to. I didn't know what they would ask me as this young freshman who was entering into the college world. And that was the reason why I didn't drink. I didn't participate in that because I was mostly scared and timid and uptight. I ended up leaving that fraternity pretty quick out of the kind of fear and timidity of that kind of situation. The thing is, if I would have stayed that way, I likely would have missed out on some of the best memories of my time in college and missed out on making a large number of the connections that have made me into the person I am today. One memory in particular took place during the winter of my freshman year. I was in this dorm called Morris Hall. There were only singles. It was all single rooms connected. Two of them would be connected by a bathroom in the middle. So it was generally a kind of you can stick to yourself kind of place. So I was fortunate to get thrust into a group of friends already that were at this dorm, and they would go hang out in the basement, shoot pool, watch a movie, play Super Smash Bros. On the basement TV, or watch football games. And later on in the year, I forget if it was in December towards the end of the first semester, or maybe in like January or February into the second semester. But one particular night, they wanted to go down, hang out, blow off some steam after, it was probably January, blow off some steam after the first couple weeks. And at that point, I was usually kind of the DD. I'd go hang out, we'd play cards, we'd do whatever in the basement. I wouldn't drink. And oftentimes the guys would ask like, hey, do you want a beer? Do you want a seltzer? Do you want a Truly? Whatever you want. And most of the time I had said no. Maybe I took a sip or something, but I didn't really partake. But over time, I got more comfortable around these guys, and then I decided, I'd grab a drink. I forget that particular night whether it was one of those fruity Seagram drinks or if it was one of the Smirnoff red, white, and berry cans. Either way, both are really kind of sugary, sweet, alcoholic drinks that you can hardly taste the alcohol in them. But I don't know exactly what made me decide to go ahead and drink that night. But looking back, I am extremely thankful that I decided to. I'm pretty sure that night we were playing some mix of Cards Against Humanity. There's Smash Bros. Up on the TV. I think Mario Kart at one point. Some euchre games going on, and then a couple drinking games. I ended up joining in one of the kind of drinking card games that was going on. I was unsure whether I was going to end up participating in the drinking part of the game. I think whoever lost had to take a shot of like Truly vodka or something. But it ended up coming around to me, and I ended up losing the game. I was like, all right, man, you got to now, and I ended up doing it. It tasted horrible. I had only had the sugary Seagrams or Smirnoff red, white, and berries at that point. But I did it. And as the night went on, I remembered loosening up. I generally in those situations around those guys wasn't extremely nervous or uptight, but I felt myself relaxing. I felt myself having more fun. I felt myself being more natural and able to have open conversations. And that was a good experience for me. At that point around those guys was generally pretty comfortable, but I still was known in that friend group as the sheltered or innocent homeschooler. And having those drinks that night led to conversations I wouldn't have otherwise had. It led to experiences I wouldn't have otherwise had, memories, and grew closer to those guys. And now, years after that event, I'm still good friends with one of the guys that I hung out with that night. And I think that's the most underrated and undiscussed thing with alcohol is what it does to you in social situations. That it makes you looser. It really is a social lubricant. It makes social situations have less friction. And you end up oftentimes coming to be closer with the people that you hang out with when you have a drink. And this was my experience as my years in college advanced to the point my senior year, I had started up a bourbon bonfires and brotherhood event with a number of my friends at college. I'd invite these friends over to, I had at this point joined a different fraternity, and they had a courtyard in the middle. It was kind of like in a square kind of situation, and there was a courtyard in the middle that the doors would open up to. And we had a bonfire pit out there and a tree and some nice orange string lights all around. It was a really, really cool spot. And on those Friday nights, sometimes I'd have one friend, 3 friends, 5 friends, any number of guys would come over, and we would grab a couple bottles off my shelf of my collection of bottles of whiskey, and we'd start a fire, and we'd just sit there and talk for 3 hours. It'd be jokes, and we'd be talking politics, philosophy, religion, whatever it was, but what it ultimately did was it allowed us to drop the barriers a little bit, that we were more honest with them, more honest with ourselves, and easier to pick up on what everyone else is feeling. And that's what alcohol does to the brain. I remember my sophomore year, we had Edward Slingerland, the author of the book Drunk, come and give a talk at one of our events at the school. And in that book, he was trying to answer the question of why, since alcohol is objectively a net negative on your health, and why have humans always drank? And ultimately, it comes down to what it does to the brain, is that it inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is also the thing that makes people more likely to lie, less likely to pick up on lies, and also less creative, less capable of thinking outside the box. And so what alcohol does is it inhibits that, making people more honest, better at picking up on social cues and picking up on the honesty or lying of others, and allows them to put new ideas together. It's the perfect thing for a bourbon, bonfires, and brotherhood event to help bring people together for an interesting, unique, and creative experience, which is what those events were. And those are all things that I honestly struggled with in college and in my younger years, was being honest with myself, being honest and open and myself around others, feeling comfortable in my own skin, being creative, voicing my opinions, voicing my ideas, and being willing to take in the ideas of others and to work together with other people. I had a hard time with those things. And I think that's the experience of Gen Z, is fewer close friends, less time interacting in person with other people, fewer unique social situations. People are getting their driver's licenses later. And all these things, I think, have led to Gen Z being perhaps the loneliest generation in history, where anxiety, depression, all these mental health numbers, suicide rates are all way up. And I think a better relationship with alcohol could really help with that. And I think Gen Z needs to drink more. That Gen Z needs to go out and have a couple beers, because I was the kid that needed to go out and have a couple beers to get out of the room, to get out of my head and out around friends. And as I did that more, I ended up having some of the best experiences of my life. I ended up going on to start a band with some friends, and we got to play some shows at college. I ended up having more honest, heart-to-heart conversations late at night with some of my fraternity brothers, with my pledge sons, the guys younger than me that I think, as I look back now, also were the kids that needed to go out and drink. I remember a couple freshmen, if they weren't in class and they weren't eating, tended to just stay back in their rooms, and they didn't go and leave the fraternity house. And some of my best experiences that senior year were going out and having a drink with some of my buddies, whether it was another fraternity house or my friend's dorm or whatever it was. And that's what I think Gen Z is missing out on. Today, we have fewer institutions to encourage these kind of relationships, these connections and experiences that bring young people together. People are having first dates later in life, having fewer romantic experiences. There's sexlessness, the fertility rates are down, and that seems to be connected to people just coupling much later in life, that people don't have as many close friends. And I think alcohol is a great tool to help bring people together. For most of history, alcohol has been present at the negotiation table. It's been at weddings, these potentially tense situations. They help ease the pressure, make people more honest, and allow for those creative exchanges to happen. I remember a story from that talk that Slingerland gave at her school, that there's a pub close to Oxford where you couldn't throw a stone without hitting someone who came up with a Nobel Prize. That the things that end up changing history might have come about because two guys decided to have a beer in a pub. So you can look at it at the macro of the great ideas of history, the great comings together of history happening over a drink, but then also the small, unique interactions of everyday life, where life just feels a little bit more special, more fun, and less serious. When you've had a couple beers and you're with a friend, watching a football game, chatting it up at a tailgate, hanging out around a bonfire, or just blowing off some steam after work. And that's why I think we need to consider alcohol a tool, a technology, one that makes us more social, as we are such social creatures. And the social aspect is something that Gen Z has had a rough time with. And that's why it's a tool that I think Gen Z needs. And Gen Z, the data shows, is more lonely, more depressed, has fewer romantic partners, fewer close friends than the generations past. And if you really do care about health, then you'd want to be doing everything you can to make sure people are as well connected as possible, because the single greatest predictor of long-term health outcomes they found is the quality of your close relationships, is the number of relationships you have and how good they are. It's even more likely to contribute to positive health than the negative effects of smoking and excessive alcohol abuse are. That it's the social connections that lead to long-term health outcomes for people. And at the same time, health consciousness around alcohol is dropping. We're seeing lifespan decrease. We're seeing depression go up. We're seeing loneliness. We're seeing all these problems, especially in the youth, in the young people that are the future of our country. And it's in the later years of life, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old and onward, that those social connections that we have really become foundational. It's who we sit around the campfire with, on the porch with, talking about, hey, do you remember when? And if this loneliness epidemic continues, despite all the health awareness we have, if we aren't close to people, if we don't have friendships and we don't have relationships, it doesn't end up mattering very much at all in the end, because one of the most vulnerable groups of people to suicide, depression, and these other problems is late and middle-aged people in the 50s and 60s, especially men. And it shows that people need people. And alcohol is a natural facilitator of these social connections that help bring us together, build memories, have experiences that mold us for the rest of our lives. And it's these social connections that Gen Z and a lot of the West and the world at large seems to be lacking more and more as time passes. And health outcomes aren't getting better. Our culture and our country here in the U.S. has had an awkward relationship with alcohol for a long time. And it's likely that a lot of this negative appraisal of alcohol probably comes from people's own negative relationships with it, whether it's relatives, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, friends, or even themselves that had negative experiences with alcohol, drinking too much, or seeing someone who did horrible things under the influence, which is a reasonable thing. And those are the dangers of this tool, alcohol, when used poorly. And yes, I recognize the negative health aspects that alcohol can bring. It is detrimental to your brain. There is no safe amount to drink of alcohol. It messes up sleep, which is one of the best things for health and longevity. It can lead to a lot of risky situations that can get people hurt and in trouble. All these things, they do and can happen. But at the same time, people do need people. And we need to bring that emphasis back to the forefront. That we need institutions, we need situations, we need events, and we need things to bring people together. Whether it's polarization, whether it's loneliness, whatever it is, it's a lack of human connection that's killing us nowadays. And alcohol helps build human connection and has been doing that for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's why I think Gen Z needs to go drink more, to go have a beer, get some people around a campfire, sit down, drink whiskey, find whatever it is. And that's what I want to leave you with today. That we need friends, and alcohol helps with that. So, go call a friend, grab a beer. You'll make some great memories, which will encourage you to get back together in 50 years over a beer, to talk about what you did or that joke you made when you got off your phone and went and had a beer. So go drink, make some memories, connect with your friends, and enjoy life a little bit more.